Poison Blade Vortex Pathfinder was a really successful build last league, and with the changes in 3.23, it should be even better than before. So if you're looking for a well-rounded build that excels at mapping and expedition, and one that should also be pretty good for the new mechanic as well as ultimatum, then this might be it. Poison BV has a high damage uptime, allowing you to move while dealing damage, which makes it an excellent mapper. We also have access to explosions from the Obliteration wand, and being a Pathfinder, this build also has excellent defenses, and it works very comfortably on a low budget. That being said, it is able to be scaled to do much harder endgame content. It is capable of doing Ubers with enough budget, but if you're looking for a bossing build, then this is not it. This guide is incredibly thorough, so if you're a new player, this might be good for you. In the PoB, you'll find a detailed leveling guide, budget, regular, and ultra endgame versions of the build, as well as a newly added full DPS version. This guide also contains a detailed spreadsheet with everything from a leveling guide, information on gems and skills, itemization, scaling, a shopping list. There's a whole lot of other stuff, but I have also added a new priority list for 3.23 so you know in what order to upgrade your gear. The spreadsheet should contain all the information you need, but if you do need more direct help, we have a dedicated Discord channel for the build where you can ask more specific questions and get help on your build. Last league, I reviewed dozens of POBs and helped folks optimize their builds, and I plan to do that again this league. On top of that, I've also recorded a full guided campaign playthrough to help you get the build from Twilight Strand to maps, and that'll be linked in the description. Just a note, be sure to follow the POB rather than exactly what I do in that video, because there have been some changes since last league. Let's go over some of the changes in 3.23. So one of the major ones is that BV actually got a buff to Flat Fizz. This essentially at level 20 means that we're getting approximately what is now the equivalent of a level 21 Blade Vortex. So it's kind of a free +1 level. However, the downside is that the gem loses crit, which is irrelevant to the build, but also the quality is changing from increased area of effect to 0 to 5% hit rate per blade. I'm not entirely sure how that's going to change the feel of Poison Blade Vortex. Should be a good thing, and we are scaling a lot of AoE on the tree and gear, so it's not a complete disaster to lose that quality. There are also going to be transfigured versions of the gem. Once we know what those are, and once we know how rare they are, I'll be able to update you. Another change, Plague Bearer, the damage was buffed. We get a slight loss of AoE on the quality. Again though, we are scaling AoE on the tree and gear, so we should be fine. Withering Step, this is actually a really nice buff. Instead of giving us increased elusive buff effect, which was pretty much useless, we're instead getting +2 with the debuffs when a monster enters the area. This is essentially a free anomalous Withering Step, which is great. +9 with the debuffs on an enemy when they enter the area gets you to that max wither more easily, more damage. It's a good thing. Now, one of the big things that a lot of people are talking about is the loss of the helmet enchant. 30% increased blade vortex duration. This is fairly significant. It's not a complete disaster, but the version that we are playing, Poison, scales a lot of skill effect duration on the tree, so our blade vortex will have a good uptime. And again, we might get another version of blade vortex that has a longer uptime, something like that. But even without that, it should be fine. Other than that, there have been no other changes to the Ascendancy or unique items that the build uses. Let's go over some of the unknowns about the build at this point, and bear in mind, any changes here can only be positive. There's not going to be any curveballs that GGG throws out that make this build worse. The only thing that can happen is that they reveal new information that makes the build even better. I am going to be doing early build update videos as well as discussing updates live on stream and in Discord, but let's get into it. So firstly, Transfigured Gems. These are new in this league, and we don't have any information about any of the new Blade Vortex gems. The base quality on Blade Vortex is absolutely fine, so The only question is, what are the new versions going to look like? Are they going to be better or worse? And if they're worse, then it doesn't matter because the base duration is fine. We don't have full information on these yet, but that being said, even if we did, we can't be sure exactly how hard these will be to acquire. They might be really rare, or they might have weightings on the Ascendancy enchantment bench. So yeah, for League start, all the base gem qualities we have seen will be fine. Secondly, I know you're going to be asking about which of the new Ascendancies are best. We don't have full information about these yet, but whatever we end up taking, once again, will just be free power. It's only going to be more power, nothing bad. I'm leaning toward the Wildwood Primalist Ascendancy, which will give us a lot of flexibility through the access of the charm sockets. So we'll see. I'm not sure yet, but that's what I'm leaning toward. And again, once we get into the league and we can gauge how accessible these new gems are and what all of the charms and ascendancies do, then I will update you in an update video, but also in Discord and on streams. So with all of that out of the way, let's go over the PoB. I usually do this a bit differently, but I want you to be able to see the PoB to show you how it works. So to start off, we have the leveling tree, and we are going to be leveling with Poisonous Concoction, but this tree takes you all the way from level 1 up until level 60, which is when we make that swap into BV. Level 60, this is around the start of Act 9. Previously, I had it at level 50, but I feel like 60 is the right spot. This is when you get all the quality of life. This is when it's actually going to feel really nice. Again, Poisonous Concoction, excellent leveling skill. I highly recommend you give it a shot if you're not used to playing builds that swap a bit later into their main skill. Then once we made the swap to BV, we get the rest of the trees. But let's go over some of the gear because it's important. So to start out, Dendrobate, this is the #1 most important piece of gear on the build. It's very common. It should be very cheap on League start because of how common it is. Even if this is a popular item, it's still cheap because of how common it is. The main reason we're using this, increase damage with poison if you have at least 300 dexterity. Get one of these as soon as possible and make sure you have the 300 dexterity. There are some nodes on the tree here which I've taken alacrity, but with all the pathing on the tree, there's a lot of dexterity nodes. You should be okay, but if you're going to be playing this build, please make sure that you at least have 300 dexterity, because if you don't, you're going to notice your damage fall off a lot. This also grants us, supported by level 10 chance of poison, which gives us another 40% chance of poison. This helps us cap our chance of poison. So perfect chess. Next thing, Obliteration. This is where we get our explodes from, and is also part of the reason why I don't like playing this build on a cultist. Gain 33% of physical as extra chaos. That's a lot of damage for this build. And enemies you kill have a 20% chance to explode, dealing a quarter of their maximum life as chaos damage. Perfect wand. Great for clear. It's excellent. New addition to the budget version of the build is Zeel's Amplifier. I actually found one of these while I was leveling this build last league, and I thought, this is perfect. So I've actually added it to the new budget version. Again, very common, very cheap item, but this gives us life, gives us energy shield, gives us spell damage, which a bit important, but not that much, but mainly increased area of effect per enemy killed recently up to 50%. Increased area of effect, great. Also, you have Zealot's Oath if you haven't been hit recently. This means that your life regeneration instead applies to energy shield regeneration, which is really nice, especially early on for Eldritch Battery builds. We will go into Eldritch Battery, but this is great. If you can get a little bit of life regeneration on a couple of pieces of gear, then that's great. So other than that, Ming's Heart, this, once again, we have that gain physical as extra chaos damage and a whole lot of chaos resistance. Perfect ring. Usually fairly, not expensive on League start, but 30, 40, 50 chaos. We'll see how much it costs, but these will be your first 3 items. #1, Dendrobate, then Obliteration, and Zeel's Amplifier. These 3, very common, very cheap. The rest of the gear is just going to be rare stuff. As for your flasks, super important. Please don't overlook this. But for early maps, we're going to be using an instant recovery when on low life flask, and then either something like grants immunity to bleeding, possibly freeze, but in the cheap early version of the build, we are using Purity of Elements, which grants us immunity to elemental ailments. Then on top of that, Granite Flask, Jade Flask, Quicksilver Flask, and a Silver Flask. these will just all work together to help us stay alive, go a bit more quickly. If you don't want to go as quickly, if you're feeling like you're a bit scared, you can maybe use something like a bismuth flask or something like that, but I would stick with the silver to start off. Also, we have the early map gems, which is a 5 link. As you can see, here are all the links. Our auras to start off, Grace, and I think Purity of Elements to start out. This will probably be up until early red maps. You'll be using your Purity of Elements instead of Determination. This just gets our resistances more easily capped and means that we are immune to elemental ailments. So freeze, chill, shock, ignite, all of that stuff. Then our Divine Blessing. I will go over Eldritch Battery because it's very important, but Malevolence grants us increased skill effect duration, which means that our BV stays up longer, and also we deal more damage over time. Poison is damage over time. More damage is more damage. It's good. Then for our utility skills, we have Plague Bearer. This works sort of like an RF. So as we deal poisons to enemies, we gain this incubating buff. And then once we reach maximum plague value, then we push this button and it does an AoE poison RF type thing. This is very important for clear. Super, super, super helpful, especially early on when your Blade Vortex isn't hitting as hard, but this will make your clear feel incredibly smooth. It is a button that you need to push once in a while, but yeah, it's great. We're linking that with increased area of effect, so it's bigger, hits more stuff. Then on our left click, we're placing Withering Step. This grants us elusive and phasing, but it also creates a little area around you, and when monsters enter that area, a certain amount of withered debuffs are placed on them. What Wither does, it's a debuff. Each stack of Wither increases the chaos damage that monster takes by 6%. And that can stack up to 15 times. But on our Ascendancy, we're getting increased effect of Withered. So that's when it does go up to 135. So it'll be 9% increased chaos damage taken per Wither stack times 15, 135. There we go. Great. And then for our curse, to start off, we're just using a single curse, Despair. Cursed enemies have minus 30 chaos res. And then for our movement skills, Shield Charge linked with faster attacks. A lot of people hate using Shield Charge. I don't know why. If you link it with faster attacks, feels way better. And then Flame Dash. And then Herald of Agony. This grants us more poison damage and increased chance to poison on hit. And very important, in all of your empty gems and in your offhand weapons, you want to level as many Blade Vortex gems as possible, because once these reach level 20, we want to corrupt them to either get a Blade Vortex level 21 or a Vaal Blade Vortex. So this is our early map setup. Let's just look at the early map POB. So once we've transitioned into BV, this is pretty much how it's going to look. There is a small respec when we go from the Poisonous Concoction into the BV swap. But this is, I've listed these in the spreadsheets, which nodes you need to unspec and swap. It's about 10 points. If you look closely, you'll find it. But if you need exact nodes that you need to unspec, it is listed in the spreadsheet, which is linked in the description. But round level 67, once you get your Dendrobate, which should be your #1 priority, the first thing you go for, we're going to be using Eldritch Battery. This is mega important for a lot of reasons. What this does, spend energy shield 4 mana for skill mana cost. So all of our skills, Blade Vortex, Shield Charge, all of that, we're going to be using energy shield instead of mana, which means we can reserve all of our mana. So this essentially gives us access to 2 more auras. Because we have our energy shield to cast our spells, we need 0 mana, and it means that we can use this Divine Blessing aura. Divine Blessing, essentially it turns your aura into a temporary aura where it's a button you push, it takes a chunk of your mana down, and then it casts it for a certain duration. So without Eldritch Battery, we wouldn't have access to Malevolence, or we would have to drop Grace. Super good. Now let's look over the main version. So this is sort of, I guess, week 1. You've got a bit of currency. Most of this is going to be fairly similar, but let's go over the changes. So we're still using our Obliteration. You should get a better roll with a higher Fizz as extra chaos. Dendrobate, higher increased damage with poison when you have at least 300 dexterity. But then we're going to be using Dawnbreaker Colossal Shield. This is super strong, especially on Pathfinder defensively. Grants us a ton of armor. But then more importantly, 17, well, I think it's 10 to 20% Cold taken as fire, Lightning taken as fire, and Fizz taken as fire. If we combine this with a Ruby Flask, this, one of the implicits is 20% less fire damage taken. Less fire damage, very powerful, which we are then scaling with our Ascendancy Pathfinder, increased effect of magic flasks. This and this, huge defensive upgrades. You can see effective hit pool sitting at about 50. If we take that off and we take that off, oh yikes, it suddenly drops very low. So Dawnbreaker, Ruby Flask, these two are excellent. Some people prefer Leper's Arms. I really like Dawnbreaker. This is my go-to on this build. Very good defensive thing. Helmet, it's going to be pretty straightforward. Life, resistance, if you need to top off your resistances. We are going to be using our flasks to cap our resistances, but you will still need some on gear. Spell suppression, super important. And then also things like life regeneration is another excellent suffix. Then bench, we're going to go plus level of socketed AoE gems and increased area of effect. This is to further offset that loss of AoE on the quality on BV. Implicits, mana reservation, efficiency of skills. This is important. It'll allow us to fit in a Defiance Banner aura, which grants us increased armor and evasion. And then that other implicit, increased area of effect. If you want, you can go for increased Despair or Temporal Chains Curse aura effect. But I like the increased AoE. I feel like that's much better quality of life with 100% uptime compared to the curse aura effects. Then our gloves, strength, dexterity, spell suppression, life regen, intelligence, but we're going to be using armor evasion gloves, so you shouldn't get intelligence on those unless you use an essence. But the implicits, chaos damage over time multiplier, a lot of extra damage, and then chaos damage leeches life for a bit of recovery. Very nice. Boots, poisons you inflict, deal damage faster, and 1% max fire resistance to further augment that Dawnbreaker Ruby Flask combo. And then the other mods, suppression, strength, life, bit of resistance, life regen, movement speed, of course. Those are all good. Our amulet, this is where we need to get a lot of our attributes. So we do need to hit that 300 dexterity breakpoint. We're also going to need 188 intelligence just to use our Obliteration wand. As for our strength, we need about 155 if we want to use our max level shield charge and determination. So try and get all your attributes on this. You can use intrinsic catalysts to further quality this up. And I recommend getting an agate amulet, which gives us strength and intelligence. Most important mod on this is going to be level of all physical skill gems. This is going to increase our Blade Vortex by +1, which gives us a lot more damage. And then as for the craft, increased area of effect, increased area damage. But if you do need more resistances or attributes, you can use that bench crafted mod to put those in. As for the Anoint, so on our budget version, to start off, you want to anoint exceptional performance. This is a very, very cheap anoint. It is clear amber black. That shouldn't cost you more than a couple of chaos orbs, and it grants us 25% increased skill effect duration. This is going to be there to offset that loss of the helmet enchant, but this is really cheap. You're not going to feel bad anointing this, and it's great quality of life. However, once we get a better amulet and you want to commit to it, we're going to anoint Overcharged. That is this over here, which is a clear, opalescent, and silver. These should cost you probably about in the realm of 30 chaos on League start, but this grants us a chance to gain a Power Frenzy and Endurance Charge on kill. This is excellent for mapping. We're getting Frenzy Charges, which is more damage, and Endurance Charges, which is more survivability, which also allows us to use Immortal Call. So what Immortal Call does is take less physical and elemental damage for a short time, consumes up to 5 endurance charges to lengthen the buff and further lessen the physical damage taken. So with endurance charges, when our Immortal Call procs, this can save us from dying. It's really important, and that's why I like Overcharge. It also, I don't have any of these turned on, but you can see it makes our damage go up to have those frenzy charges. Endurance charges makes that go up, and when our Immortal Call actually procs, you can see our EHP jumps up. I've disabled this just so that it doesn't inflate the EHP in PoB and make it look better than it actually is, but Overcharged, that is our go-to anoint. Then Ming's Heart, get a better one, but what you also need to do is use Noxious Catalyst. This is going to improve the quality of that Fizz's extra Chaos mod. A lot of damage. Other ring, get what you want, Amethyst ring, just to top off that last bit of Chaos resistance. Then life, attributes, resistances, maybe even a bit of energy shield, life regen. Those are all great. Our belt, life, regen. Then you can get some interesting flask ones like increased flask effect duration, increased effect of flasks on you, but those are kind of luxury at this point, so try get your resistances and things, attributes, whatever you need. And then very important bench crafts. Regenerate 150 energy shield per second while a rare or unique enemy is nearby. This is going to be very important once you get rid of your Zeel's Amplifier, so when you're fighting bosses, you're not going to run out of energy shield and you will still be able to cast your Divine Blessing and your BV and all of that. This is a very, very common unveil. If you need to ask a friend to get it for you, then do so, but very important, make sure you get that. In the jewel slot, you can put in whatever you still need. So life, maybe a bit of resistance or attributes. And as for our flasks, again, we have this ruby flask. The suffix I like on it is additional elemental resistances. Some people are terrified of using their flasks to cap resistances, but on Pathfinder, it's actually okay if you have the enchant reused at the end of this flask effect or reused when charges reach full. On Pathfinder, you can get away with it. At the start of the map, you hit your flasks. If you're mapping a lot, it shouldn't ever go down. So as for our Quicksilver flask, same thing. You can go for the prefix, increased duration, reduced charges used. Those things are good. Max charges also good. And then the suffix, increased movement speed during effect. We have our Jade Flask, which again, reuse the end of a flask effect. And then the suffix you want is increased evasion during effect. Granite Flask, increased armor during effect. And yeah, reduced charges, max charges. I've kind of mixed them all up so you can see which ones are good. And then once again, Panicked or instant recovery when on low life flask. So when your life dips below half, hit this and it instantly pops you back up to full. These suffixes on your flasks, if you, let's say, are rolling all of these at the same time and you get armor as a suffix on your Jade Flask or armor as a suffix on your Quicksilver, that's okay. Keep rolling your other flasks. It doesn't have to be that your Jade Flask has evasion. It can be that your Granite Flask has evasion as a suffix and your Jade Flask has armor as a suffix. That's fine. But please, please, your flasks are so important. Last league, so many people showed me their builds and their flasks were messed up. Flasks are one of the most important defensive layers on this build. It makes the build so good, especially on a Pathfinder. So please don't overlook this. I cannot overemphasize how important it is to pay attention to your flasks. Then I've also included an extreme endgame of the version. I'm not going to go over that now, but if you want to go all in on the build, you can. And then I've added a DPS version. I may actually be playing this version of the build. This is very greedy. We're using 2 Cold Iron points, Dendrobate, Asenath, 2 Ming's Heart. I'm not going to fully go over this, but some of the stuff we can talk about. Since Rebirth is a very nice flask. If you can get this, you can swap it out for your Jade Flask. Unholy Might grants 30% of Fizz as extra chaos during effect. This also grants us 20% more evasion rating and immunity to Ignite. So this is actually a really nice flask. Taste of Hate is, again, this is another excellent flask, especially on Pathfinder. Physical damage taken as cold during effect, and then same flask. The rest of the gear, fairly straightforward, but let's talk about Cold Iron Points. So this is something you're going to need on the non-DPS version. Usually, I think sits around 40-50 chaos on League Start, but it's not that important to start off. This is just important for when you want to kill your Eldritch bosses. So if you're going to do Eater and Exarch, things like that, you might want to swap in a Cold Iron Point. Actually, you should swap a Cold Iron Point in. If you can't afford it, it's okay. It's not like you won't be able to kill the boss, but this will certainly massively help your damage. So you take out your Obliteration, put in your Cold Iron Point. This grants us +3 level of all physical spell skill gems, increase the level of our Blade Vortex, more damage. So get one of these. As for Asenath, so because on this build, this DPS version of the build, we're not using Obliteration. Instead, we can use Asenath. So this automatically applies temporal chains onto enemies, and then enemies killed near corpses affected by your curses explode, doing 3% of their life as physical damage. So this is how we get that same explosion effect, but on a DPS version that does not use Obliteration. I prefer having the rare gloves because this build is kind of stretched for attributes and things. Just a note, if you do the DPS version, the skill setup is slightly different because we don't have a shield. We can't use shield charge. Instead, what we're going to be using is whirling blades with faster attacks, which actually feels amazing on this. So the rest is pretty much the same, but I say stick to the main. Let's go over the tree. So like I said, we have the leveling tree for Poisonous Concoction. That's all there. Once we get to level 60, we're going to swap over to Blade Vortex. And then once we get to 67-ish, you should be able to afford your Dendrobate. Hopefully, it's normally just a couple of chaos. Pop in that Eldritch Battery, get your Zeels, and start using that. Then the rest of the tree, let's have a look. Oh no, I have a new mouse and it scrolls too fast. Help. Okay, there we go. The rest of the tree, most of it is going to be very straightforward. Things like life, very important mastery. Let's have a look. 15% increased maximum life if there are no life modifiers on equipped body armor. Dendrobate doesn't have any life on it, so we can use this, which is amazing. This grants us a bunch of life. The rest of it, here we have poison, chance to poison, poison damage over time, life. This node right here, very important. Evasion and phasing, 10% chance to grant phasing for 4 seconds on kill. It's very easy to miss this because it's just one little tiny point sitting here, but don't overlook that. Over here, we're grabbing charisma for increased mana reservation efficiency. Here, wasting chaos damage over time multiplier and chaos resistance. Also, this chaos mastery, 5% chance when you inflict withered to inflict up to 15 wither debuffs instead. I still wish that GGG would add a wither counter on monsters so you could see how much wither is being applied. I'm pretty sure this build actually applies 15 wither stacks very comfortably, but I can't be sure. Going up, we're getting damage over time mastery over here, which grants us increased skill effect duration. Like I said, skill effect duration will apply how long our BV stays up before we have to recharge. Then we're getting more damage over time. Spell suppression over here. Chaos damage and also increased skill effect duration. Poison damage is chaos damage, so this is a double whammy. It's great. Over here, very important. This circle, area of effect, area of effect, area of effect, and then this mastery. Skills supported by Unleash have +1 maximum number of seals. We are linking our Blade Vortex with Unleash, so when you hit that button to make your Blade Vortex goes, instead of having to push it 5 times to get 5 stacks, this pushes it once and you get your 5 stacks, then it slowly recharges, push it again and you go up to your full 10 stacks. This is another reason why we don't spec into BV sooner. Then we're getting a bit of more reservation and aura effect, and then around level 95 we're swapping in Whispers of Doom. This allows us to use our second curse, so this is going to be Temporal Chains and Despair. We're getting a bit more damage here. Force Shaper, physical damage with skills that cost life. We have skills cost 30% life instead of mana cost. We're getting a bit of Flask stuff. Over here, Revenge of the Hunted, more life. Chance to spread spell damage while on full life. Don't get baited by this. If you're looking at your character in hideout, don't see that you have 100% spell suppression. It might just be at full life. So what you must do is open your character sheet, press C, look at your spell suppression, and then press your button to cast Blade Vortex. If you have skills cost life instead of 30% mana cost, your life will dip for a second. If you see that number change to anything other than 100%, that means you're not spell suppression capped at full life. So get that extra bit of spell suppression where you can. There's these nodes over here. Quick step, there's a bit of more spell suppression if you need it. Then this mastery, 15% chance to spread spell damage if equipped. Helmet, body armor, gloves, and boots all have evasion rating. That should be a very easy 15% spell suppression to get. Wind Dancer, very nice on this build. We take less damage if we haven't been hit by an attack recently, well, less attack damage, and we have more chance to evade attacks if we have been hit by an attack recently, but we take more attack damage if we have been hit. Our evasion rating pretty solid with our Flasks up on the main version, so we have 34, 35k evasion rating, so this works really nicely. The rest of it is pretty straightforward. As for our Ascendancy, in order, I believe the Ascendancies we go for are, let's see, yep, we're going for Master Toxcist. When you kill a poison enemy during any Flask effect, nearby enemies are poisoned, and poison you inflict during any Flask effect have a 20% chance to deal 100% more damage. That's really strong. Then next up, what we're going for is Nature's Reprisal, 25% chance to inflict Withered for 2 seconds on hit, and 50% increased effect of Withered. So our Withered per stack now grants 9% increased chaos damage taken, up to 15 times, 135% increased chaos damage taken. Then moving up, next thing, Nature's Adrenaline. Flasks gain charges every 3 seconds, and our final one will be Nature's Boon. Magic utility flasks applies to you, have 30% increased effect. These little travel nodes are also great. Increased flask charges gained, increased flask charge effect, flask charge duration, chaos damage, all excellent stuff. Going over the skills for the main, again, this is very similar. One of the only changes is that once we have allocated this Whispers of Doom, we're going to have 2 curses. So what we want to use is Despair, Temporal Chains linked with Arcanist Brand. This way, when we cast Arcanist Brand, it's going to attach onto a monster and apply both curses. So you're not going to have 2 buttons to cast both curses. You just cast this Arcanist Brand, it applies both curses. That's going to be it for the POB, but let's have a look at the spreadsheet super quickly. This has the leveling over here, so you can see which gems to get when, and a few little tips here and there. Also on the right, we have where you get your trial, which skill point quests you need to do. So have a look at this. This is also listed in the POB, showing you which skills to take when. Here we have a newly added priority list. This will show you what kind of gear you need to get when. So firstly, get your Dendrobate, then get your Obliteration, then Zeel's Amplifier, Flasks, so and so, all the way down to 23, at which point you are like mega geared. Here's our leveling skills. This shows you all of this information about each of the skills. Also, there is a leveling guide, like I mentioned in the intro, full leveling guide from Act 1 all the way to the start of maps. You can click these links and play along with me if you want. Here's the Eldritch Battery swap, so it shows you what you need to make that transition and why it's so good. Here's main skills, explaining all the skills. All this is here if you prefer reading. Our unique items, and then our rare items, the flashbangs, defenses scaling, shows all here, damage, and then we have a shopping list. I wish it wouldn't flashbang every time, shopping list. So if you want to just click these links, it'll bring up the website. For the rare items, I would be cautious of clicking these links because it might not be the exact item you want, but it should be helpful. Check that out if you need. Also, there is a help section, which is like, oh no, the build sucks, what's wrong? If none of this helps, do hop in the Discord and we can help you more directly. And then the last couple of things, bossing, mapping, FAQ. If you click the link for this spreadsheet and it is full, underneath it there will be a backup link. Click that. That is a published web version where there's not a limit on how many people can be part of the document. Before we go, let's just go over some of the strengths and weaknesses of the build so you have a clear picture. So for the strengths, we have things like Expedition, Breach, and Mapping are all excellent on this build. Possibly Ultimatum will be really good with this because you have an uptime on your damage. You don't need to stop to attack. You use your Blade Vortex and you run around. Same thing for the new League mechanic. Also, this build is really well-rounded and tanky. I went from level 94 to 99 Deathless while farming altars and clicking all of them, so it's not squishy. It's also a fast general mapper. It's got good clear. It can do bosses comfortably with a weapon swap, but it's not a dedicated bossing build. If you're looking to do Ubers, if you're looking to kill Eater and Exarch 100 times, do not play this build. This is not the build for it. And we have a very detailed guide, which is great for new people, and a very engaged Discord community for direct help. You can find the link to the Discord in the description. This build's also cheap to get up and running. It can scale really well, and once again, damage while moving, 100% damage uptime, that is a major plus. As for the weaknesses, can't ignore these. One of the things is that the damage is ramping. So against bosses, you'll notice that when your Blade Vortex starts hitting them, it'll apply poisons which slowly stack. So initially it looks like your damage is very low, and then as you get more and more poisons on the boss, then that life bar will start going down at an accelerated pace, but it's not instant damage. That doesn't really matter for mapping. You will notice it more with bossing. Another thing, this build sucks at Sanctum. If you're looking for a Sanctum runner, do not play this. It also is not great for Legion. It's more of a mapper. The playstyle, it's a bit off-putting to some people because you have to stop and charge your BV every 6 or 7 seconds. That actually feels fine to me. If you're playing a self-cast build, you're going to be stopping and casting a lot more often. But some people just don't like it. Also, this can't scale as far as other builds because of the dot cap, but honestly, I don't think this is an issue unless you start throwing tons of currency at the build, and it's a non-issue for the vast majority of people. Hitting the dot cap generally is kind of excessive damage, but yep, if you want to do hundreds of millions of damage, this build is not it. Another thing some people might not like is the close quarters combat. So this build does have really good AoE and explosions and poison proliferation, so it doesn't actually feel that close range, but some people do feel like they prefer more ranged spells and more ranged weapon attacks. So if you don't like semi-close quarters-ish combat, then you might not like this. And then one of the big downsides for a lot of people is that we only start using Blade Vortex at level 60. If you're someone who takes a long time to get through the campaign, you might feel like this is a major negative. If you get through the campaign more quickly, it's fine. However, we will be leveling with Poisonous Concoction, which is not only a really good skill, but it's really fun. So the lead up before you swap into Blade Vortex is actually totally fine. It's fun, and it'll let you learn a new skill on top of that. But that's going to be it for this video. The links for everything you need are in the description. Included is the POB, the link for the document, the leveling guide, everything. I've also included POBs for all the characters that you saw for the gameplay footage, just for the sake of clarity. You know that I'm not debating you. All those POBs will be in the description. But that's going to be it for this video. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Stay safe. Be sure to like, subscribe, all that stuff. Follow on Twitch, join the Discord, and happy bait vortexing. Take you later. Bye.
Divine power! Divine power! It's branching exile. You're making me nervous.